Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning into Health Podcast Show, the place to be to get the insights of leaders working at the intersection of health, science, and media. I'm your host, Dan Kendall, and this episode features a recording from the 2025 Health Podcast Summit, which was held on October 1st and 2nd. In total, we interviewed 42 speakers in 37 sessions that span topics across health, science, policy, and podcasting. You can wait to get access to all the sessions as we publish them here on your favorite platform, or you can get access to all the recordings, links, and resources by visiting our website at healthpodcast.org. Again, that's healthpodcast.org. Enjoy the show. Welcome to this session of Health Podcast Summit 2025. I'm your host, Dan Kendall, and our opening speaker today is Steve Pratt. Steve is the author of Earn It, Unconventional Strategies for Brave Marketers. It's an excellent book that I listened to twice and then picked up this copy so that I could highlight and dog-ear different pages. In this session, Steve and I talk about storytelling, why misinformation spreads faster than facts, and how creativity can be applied to serious and important topics like those that need to be addressed here in healthcare. Steve has years of experience creating successful shows, and like the title says, he shares why you need to earn the attention of your audience. There's no other way to really grow sustainably. Sure, you can buy clicks and views and impressions, but you can't buy a loyal audience. As we open up day 2 of Health Podcast Summit 2025, I want to thank all of the sponsors and partners who have helped make this possible. A very special thanks to our gold sponsor, BetterHelp, and to our silver sponsor, ZS. Please visit healthpodcastsummit.com for links to all the organizations shown here on the slides and for special offers that they make available to people who have registered. Now let's open up day 2 of Health Podcast Summit with this conversation with Steve Pratt. Steve, thanks so much for joining me here at Health Podcast Summit.
It's a treat to be here. Thanks for having me. I love that you're doing this.
I've already introduced the audience a little bit about your background and who you are, but let's just jump right into this book. Can you tell me, in your words, what this book is about, and tell us a little bit about why you wrote it?
Yeah, so the book is about attention. It is about where we sit today compared to where things used to be for attention. And if you're in the marketing or the content creating space, attention should be one of your primary points of focus in terms of, if you don't have anybody's attention, you don't really have anything else. You don't have any time with them. Your message isn't getting heard. Your business results aren't showing up. You don't have an audience, all those different pieces. And I think maybe too many people, because of a model that used to be based on interruptive advertising, where you could, buy attention or steal attention or interrupt it, it doesn't really work anymore. So the whole premise of the book is that you need to earn it by doing things that are really, truly valuable for the audience. And that the book is kind of a playbook for how to think differently about attention and how to actually create things that people are excited to spend time with.
So you caught my attention right at the beginning. I've listened to this twice. I have thumbed through this. I haven't read this cover to cover, but I've gone through the parts that I've been listening to, and I thought, this is what I want to go, because you do have some diagrams and some things in here. I knew right at the beginning, you talked about Joseph Campbell, you talked about Malcolm Gladwell, you gave examples from Clay Christensen. And as you were going through that sort of preface to the book, I thought, okay, he's tuned into the same sort of sources that I respect and admire. So let's see how this reflects on what we're doing here as we try to work at the intersection of health and podcasting, or audio and podcast and audio and health. You also quoted Tom Webster, who also has a session here on the Health Podcast Summit. So there's lots of great people that you're keeping your eye on and that you're applying. Specifically, I want to touch on one thing that you talk about at the beginning of this book. You mentioned Clay Christensen and the sort of Venn diagram of the job and the gift. And I actually have a blog post that I've been working on for a while about this very thing, about the job that we hire podcasts to do. So can you give a little bit of an insight about what that sort of Venn diagram shares inside this book and what the job is compared to the gift?
I'm a huge fan of Clayton Christensen. He wrote The Innovator's Dilemma. He was a professor at Harvard who specialized in innovation and disruption. And he had this idea of jobs to be done theory, which is that customers are coming in where they have a job that they need done, and they're looking to hire something to do the job for them. And your product or service or podcast might be one of the things that could get their job done. And so understanding the job that someone is looking to hire a podcast to do for them is is part of the focus that, I think about when it comes to health is if you're making a podcast, why are you making that podcast? What's the job that you're hiring a podcast to do for you? And then on the flip side, how can you design a podcast that is going to be seen as a gift for your listener? Something that they are going to be really excited about, something that after they spend time with it, they're going to say, that was a great use of my time and I can't wait to listen to more of it. I think traditionally you get, people on the creative side who will over-index on the gift side and make something that's really a terrific listen, but doesn't deliver any business results or doesn't actually accomplish the job. And sometimes on the marketing or the business side, we will over-index on the job and do something that feels a little bit more selfish about like, this is what we're looking for in here, but it's actually not that valuable for the listener. So there's a nice Venn diagram overlap between balancing the job and the gift. And when you get those in balance, you get a really successful show that delivers results and people love listening to.
So just to build that out a little bit further, so one of the things I thought was interesting around it is that you say you've got the job and you have the gift. And I think that sort of depends, each of those sides of the circle depend on the vantage point. So in Clay Christensen's example, he was studying why people buy milkshakes in the morning. And that's actually sort of along the lines of the title of the blog post that I'm writing around what do milkshakes and podcasts have in common. And he found that people weren't buying milkshakes because they enjoyed a milkshake in the morning. They wanted something they could consume with one hand that wasn't going to get them dirty and full of crumbs on the way to work, something that was ready to begin consuming as soon as they had it handed to them, not like a piping hot cup of coffee where the threat of hard braking or spilling something on you can be pretty threatening when you're driving to work at 60 miles an hour. So he found that they were actually hiring the milkshake to do that job of providing the satiation of their hunger, something they can consume, something to keep them company and last the whole trip, something they could consume right away and last the whole trip to their destination on the way to work. And that's the way I think podcasts work. And the interesting thing about that Venn diagram is the job that needs to be done is different for the maker of the milkshake than the consumer of it. So to use it in podcasting, the job, yes, there's a motivation as a business that there needs to be some payoff, some reason why you're creating this content. But for the consumer of it, that job might be keeping them company on the way to work. And then same thing with the gift. What is the gift to the recipient in terms of the company and the experience they're giving? And then also, what is the gift, the reward for the organization that is creating it? So can you reflect on that? Any other comments to illustrate that a little bit more deeply?
Yeah, I love that. It is like a little bit of a circle going around of jobs and gifts being exchanged back and forth when it's done well.
Yeah.
I also love that you're pulling the milkshake in because podcasts are a thing consumed in cars, right? And a lot of the milkshake parallels are very similar, like to the podcast stuff. So you're actually the first person that I've ever heard that has pulled that comparison. I love it, and I can't wait to read your blog post.
Oh, awesome. Well, we'll have it out before this goes live, so people will make sure we link to it in the notes of this. So you also use another term in the beginning of this book, which was creatively brave. And I think that in healthcare, it's certainly not a creative industry, but we do have a lot of very creative people. Your wife works in the medical field. There are lots of people who are wonderful musicians and artists that also are extraordinarily talented in healthcare and a variety of business or practicing roles. But we don't really think ourselves as creatively brave in the healthcare space. So can you explain what that term means and how that might get applied?
Yeah, so creative bravery for me is a set of questions you can ask yourself, and you can put it on a scale of like 0 to 10 or something like that, of where you rank on creative bravery. But, on the 10 side is this so good that I would tell other people about it if I wasn't one of the people making the show? Is this a real show that feels like a show that a media company or somebody that I would listen to would make about something that I'm really interested in? That's on the high end of creative bravery, because that's what it actually takes to earn people's attention, is something that is word of mouth worthy, something that is so good that other people will talk about it, and so good that after you've spent time with it, you would come back and do it again. Like if you're able to go back in a time machine and say like, should I listen to this thing again, knowing what it is? You'd say, yes, that's a totally great use of my time and attention. That's creative bravery. And I think in some ways, as you're developing shows or ideas or listening to episodes that you've got, kind of in the formative stage that are not done, ask yourself those questions. Is this so good that I would go back and listen to this again or tell other people about it if I wasn't the one making it? It's a very high bar, but that's kind of the bar that we all have as listeners and consumers of content. We don't suffer average stuff very well. We certainly don't suffer through subpar things. Making something, if you're putting all the time and effort into putting something out and you want to share a big idea or you want to share your thoughts or points of view or valuable health information, make it as compelling as humanly possible and make it as high quality as humanly possible. Do yourself the service of making it wonderful for other people to enjoy. You'll know that things start sliding lower down the creative bravery score if it's, are you talking about yourself all the time, about how smart you are? Are you talking in kind of industry speak, or like, do you have the curse of knowledge where you're assuming a lot of knowledge on the part of the listener that may not be there and making it inaccessible to people? Are you talking inside baseball with your colleagues about things that is more for, a certain tier of conversation rather than accessible for the people that you're actually trying to reach? So, ultimately creative bravery is kind of an acknowledgement of empathy for your audience and thinking about like, how can I make the best possible gift for the people I'm trying to reach? And if you want to create a valuable gift, you have to know who the people are and what their needs are, what jobs they're looking to be done, as you mentioned.
You use a lot of pattern interrupts on the audio version. You bring in sound effects. You talk to your colleague in the sound booth. You have little conversations with yourself and sort of some flashbacks and flash forwards around different topics. In the hard copy book, you do the same thing. You actually talk about how, as a young person, as a young boy, you wanted to be very different. And you, even in this manifestation of this book, in the paper copy, you do have some things that you are doing very different. For example, the table of contents is on page 34. So you've actually just, even as you begin to turn the pages, the book experience is very different to what you might typically expect when you pick up something to read. You were just touching on some of those things in terms of what people might do wrong. So let's tease at that a little bit more. Let's talk about what are some of the things that people do get wrong when they start to think about how they can create a podcast or just really create with an audience or connect with an audience generally.
Man, we could do like a couple hours on that.
Sure. We don't have it. We don't have that much time.
I know. Yeah. I'll try and be short. So I think the number one thing is figure out who you are and what makes you special, and to kind of double down on the stuff that is authentically you. There's a lot of podcasters who'll be like, oh, this is what works. I should be more like Joe Rogan, or I should be more like an NPR host. And they end up kind of playing the role of what they think a podcast host should be rather than being themselves and figuring out what are the parts and traits of themselves that are uniquely interesting and differentiated about themselves. I think there's also a preconception that a podcast is just two people showing up and talking as an uninterrupted, unedited conversation. And I think when you think about creative bravery and that idea of like, what's a show, there's so many more things you could do that will generate attention and make something that is, again, uniquely yours, that people will associate with you. And that in show terms, we call that a format. And you could recognize it all over the place. Like you could see, Wheel of Fortune every single night. It's, exactly what's going to happen every single second of that show because it's the same format. Every reality show has a format. We know, if you watch The Bachelor, that there are certain things of the confessional interviews, or, this is the final rose. If you don't get a rose, please say your goodbyes. Whatever it is, like, we know these things. You can build those things into your own shows, and different segments or different things where you're kind of editing and cutting out the boring parts. Hugely, hugely valuable. And then maybe the last thing, I think about the opening more than almost everything. The beginning matters so much to every single show and every single format. We are all scanning and figuring out, is this worth my time? Is this actually going to be interesting? And in a podcast, maybe you've got a minute, maybe you've got 90 seconds if you're lucky. You kind of have to plant a hook so quickly around, this is what you're going to get. if you stick around and listen to the rest of this episode. And it may be in healthcare, it may be, here's a really compelling patient story. And do you want to hear how this ends? And we're going to play it out and go through this over the course of an episode. It could be a new piece of research that teases something that you're going to learn if you stick around at the end of the episode, or a problem in healthcare that has not been solved that you're going to explore throughout the course of an episode. But there has to be something for the listener where it's like, why should I stick around? And if you don't answer that in the first minute, you're kind of done. That's why the page of the table of contents is on page 34 of the book. Is the book starts right in with a story to try and get you hooked in and mirrors the stuff that's in the book as well. So, at every opportunity, I think the invitation is, how can you make this more inviting and more compelling and more valuable for the listener?
Well, even starting with the title, because you talked about The Bachelor, your book is called Earn It. It's very clear what those two titles are about. I've always said that part of the reason I attribute my podcasting success back in 2016 was because the first two words of the title of my show were exactly the same two words that I was searching for when I couldn't find a show about it. It was Digital Health Today. Guess what it was about? Yeah. Digital Health Today. So I think a lot of people think of clever titles, and I think that's something we've talked about a little bit in terms of how people even get titles of their shows wrong that might miss the mark with some of their audience in terms of setting that hook, but also titles of their episodes. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So it's funny. So I used to have a podcast company, and we used to work with a lot of different companies on making shows, and figuring out the title of the show is one of the most interesting things. Sometimes, when I talk about creative bravery and making things that are different and unique, titling might be the one area where you're like, don't go too weird with it, because you want people to be able to your point, Digital Health Today, you want to know what the thing is. You want to show up and search, and you want to make it easy to remember so that you go in. So I think number one is make sure there's no other shows called Digital Health Today before you launch yours. make sure that there's no competition in the space, because we've had clients who've made shows where there's 4 other shows that are very, very similar or have the exact same title. Those shows aren't going to be happy that you made that show, and it's going to be really confusing which one to click on for a listener. Sometimes, like the number of times we had to say, like, don't use numbers or special characters or words that could be confusing. We had a show at one point where, against our best advice, it had a number with a decimal point in it, a fraction, a colon, and you're like, no one's going to find the show. And so that, if you think about, if you heard this in audio, what would you go in and type into a search engine in a podcast app? It has to be super clear and easy to remember, and to have no confusion with it. So, and I would say the same thing for episode titles, except for the episode title, it should be the hook of the episode. When you're talking about that first minute or first 90 seconds, people will scan with their eyes before they decide to sample with their ears. And having a compelling thing like, what am I going to get if I click on this episode? The title and the description matter a lot more than you think. And people will just rip it off and be like, episode 51, conversation with Steve. And it's like, I don't know who Steve is, and I don't care what episode number it is. Tell me what I'm actually going to get by listening to this episode.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Your book is called Earn It. And you talk, we won't be able to cover all the different topics inside here, but you talk a lot about the amount of work that it takes to do this. I was really surprised to hear that your process starts off with a 2-day meeting on site with your clients. Because I know a lot of people, a lot of clients that I've worked with over the years that just don't think that that's something that they would ever imagine doing. They can't really understand the rationale why they would do it. But tell us a little bit about how you develop that approach and what the payoffs or the benefits are of doing it in that way.
Yeah. So it's interesting. My background is, before I started doing, working with other companies making shows and doing content strategy, I worked in the media, and program development is a really significant process. Like, if you actually are going to make a show for a large audience, and to set up a production properly and figure out what you're going to make, having a kind of a robust program development process is really, really important. I don't know any media company on earth that would just be like, all right, I guess we're just going to start making this thing and start booking guests, and we'll just do it. I think it's different. Like it's a bit of an odd space for people who don't come from that background. And so we tried to build a program development piece that would help answer those questions. At the core of it, just going back to that job and the gift Venn diagram, let's make sure we all are agreed on what's the job that we're trying to get done with this podcast and what outcomes we're looking for. Let's figure out who we are and what makes us special and the things we need to double down on. Let's figure out what our resources and our budgets and our timelines are. And let's figure out what we know about the audience that we're trying to reach. And then we get to design a show that is going to do the job and the gift for the right people within the constraints that we have. That actually takes a lot of time, but it's such valuable time. Like it's time very well spent to do those things because it saves you so much trouble during production when you actually know what you're doing and you have a game plan and you figured out your unique format. That you're like, of course, this is for a show that only our company could make, that is going to be greatly valued by these people because we spent the time in the room. And you've got a whole bunch of people on your team that are part of that process who are collaborating on it and have some skin in the game. That makes a big difference as well. Like when you actually participate in the creation of something as a group and the inception of it, everybody's a lot more invested in seeing the success of it all the way through.
I think a lot of people that I interface with in healthcare, this isn't a fair brush to paint everybody with, but I see that a lot where people say, well, I'm going to do a podcast because I know a lot of interesting people. And I think that kind of, I always encourage people not to think that way because they're thinking about what they're going to build instead of why they're going to do it and how they're going to serve the listener. Again, with that gift that you talk about, the job they're trying to do is like, well, I need more. Everybody's telling me I need more exposure. My marketing team's telling me I need to be out there more. I need to hear from the CEO more. Our employees all around the world need to hear from our CEO. So we're going to create this podcast and she'll be able to reach people all over the world. And I think that when you look at it the other way and say, actually, who are we trying to reach and how are we going to serve them on their commute to work? How are we going to honor that time that they're spending with us while they're exercising or cooking dinner? And how are they going to be better off? You're not trying to sell advertising. You're not trying to keep on the air and feed your production studio. The organization that's funding that is trying to create something that's going to serve their audience. So how do you translate that into defining the objectives for an organization and helping them understand, hey, you can't just show up and have a conversation. You got to make something that's going to make people want to listen and stay engaged.
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's funny because I think if you do a lot of research online about podcasting and things you should pay attention to, most of the stuff you're going to get out there is advice for working in an ad-supported model where it'll be like, you should make as many episodes as you possibly can to increase your inventory. And you should be targeting in a certain way and driving certain things to get advertisers on board and maximize your revenue from the podcast itself. If you actually take that big step back in the strategy session and say like, okay, well, you're a company. What are you trying to get out of making this podcast? And so for a lot of companies, it might be brand awareness. Like we want people to know that we exist. It could be brand positioning. What do we want to be associated with in people's minds? Some of it might be net promoter score. Like for a lot of marketers, like, are you going to talk about us? Is this so good that you would tell other people about us? Because that's word of mouth is how we get around the industry. And then maybe the last piece, when we just talked about initially, like, hey, let's get our CEO to talk to interesting people. Number one, your CEO is not necessarily the brand. They might be. Maybe your business goal is to make the CEO a thought leader. But more often than not, the CEO is not the best person to host a show. They do not have a lot of time in their schedule. They don't have time to prep. They don't have time to schedule interviews. They don't have time to actually make a world-class show that is worthy of attention. And sometimes figuring out who is the best person, if you were in our audience, who would be the person you'd be really excited to have as a host of a show about this topic. You can pick anybody on earth to be the host of your show. It's your show. We did a show with Dell Technologies a number of years ago when they had just merged with Dell and EMC, and 100% they could have had Michael Dell host the podcast. And we talked about that. He would have been great. He's the prototype of like an amazing CEO who knows tons of people and could have interesting conversations. And the really, really brave marketing director, a guy named JC Gama, was like, we could do that, but isn't that going to be a signal to people in the audience that this is a show about Dell technologies and not a show for people who are interested in innovation and disruption? People might not listen if it feels like an ad or an infomercial for Dell Technologies. And so we brainstormed, and the number one person on the list that people would be excited to listen to would be Walter Isaacson as the host of the show, the guy who wrote the Steve Jobs biography, and since then the Elon Musk biography, Benjamin Franklin, like you name it. We associate Walter Isaacson with innovators. And he ended up being a host for like season after season after season of this show that became like a really big hit. He ended up on CBS This Morning, like doing like a 7-minute segment about this podcast because he was the host of the podcast and it felt like a real show. And it went straight to becoming the number one business podcast in America. That would not have happened if it was a CEO hosting the show. And everybody, like from one listen, we did research with this, with C-suite executives on a panel, a single exposure to a single episode of this show, people knew it was Dell Technologies. They liked it and wanted to listen more, and they associated them with expertise in digital transformation and innovation and disruption. I think we have to be too heavy-handed by being like, it has to be us hosting it and owning all of these things. Not necessarily the case.
It kind of goes back to one of the things you said in your book in terms of needs to be from you, not about you. And I think a lot of people look at creating podcasts as a binary decision. Do I do one? Don't I do one? It's not a matter of do you or don't you. It's really a matter of what kind of podcast do you do. Because in my mind, you're still going to have a website. You're still going to have phone numbers. You're still going to have email addresses. You're doing all these different things. So why wouldn't you give your audience that you're trying to reach some additional insight into what you're doing? So one of the things I often suggest is doing seasons, or just starting off with something. Just tell the beginning, middle, and end across 3 episodes, 6 episodes, 10 episodes, and have each of these be sort of small segments to give people some insights about your business, your work, your genesis story, whatever it might be. Can you think of any examples where you did something similar to that in terms of not necessarily taking on 52 episodes a year or 12, but just saying, hey, let's just start with something that will get us from here to there and sort of the business objectives behind it?
Yeah, you know what? This is a really easy answer. We never did 52 episodes a year, ever. And it was exactly the same logic that you were talking about. Is like, you don't need to do that if you're not in an ad-supported model. And when you think differently about it, like I'm a huge Curb Your Enthusiasm fan. And it's always the most interesting example to me because that show is in seasons and we don't know when it's coming back. There's been cases where there's been years and years and years between seasons. And yet when a new season is coming up, I find out about it months in advance because HBO does a really, really good job marketing the show and getting people excited for the return of Curb Your Enthusiasm. And it may be only 8 episodes, but I'm waiting for every single one of those episodes with bated breath. We would often talk about that with clients, say like, instead of making like 26 mediocre episodes that lots of people aren't going to listen to and they're not going to talk about, why don't you make 6 mind-blowing ones and you can market those for 6 months and then come back and make another season and have people waiting for more? I would always rather have people waiting for more rather than having a queue of things that never get listened to. And in general, when you're in marketing and you want to change the way people think about you, fewer things better is a great rule to follow. And I will say one other thing too is, this is the one other thing about podcasting. Every medium is different. And I think understanding the unique strengths of each medium is really, really important. The superpower of audio is time. It's engagement. There's no other medium on the planet where if somebody hits play, they're going to spend almost a full, 30, 45 minutes, however long your podcast is. If you do a good job, you can get people like 80, 90, 100% of the way through a podcast. On a YouTube video, even at like a minute or two, you're lucky if you get 25 or 30% completion rates on it. And on a TikTok or something like that, you're lucky if you get people for 2 seconds. You may have a smaller reach. You may have a more targeted audience, but when you get tons of time with them, it's really, really valuable. Like that really creates a relationship by spending time with people. They really get to know who you are and like you. And the other unique thing about podcasting is that there's no rocket ship growth on a podcast. Like it's, I think Ira Glass said, podcasts do go viral. It's just very slowly. When you do a podcast, even if it's for those 6 episodes, you have to be patient and consistent. You can't just show up and start a podcast and expect you're going to have Joe Rogan numbers. It doesn't happen. You have to put in the work. It is hard work, but it's also really, really worth it. Like it can be a real transformational marketing tool and communication tool for any business when it's done well. But going in and understanding what success looks like and what you have to do in order to get it is really important.
One of the things you said in the book, I think it was about 3/4 of the way through, you said, when you're finished creating content, you're halfway done. So what do you mean we're halfway done? What has to be done after that?
Well, you have to tell people about it. I don't know where the thing comes from, the field of dreams, if you build it, they will come. That is not true at all for podcasts. If you build it, they will not come. You actually have to go out and tell them that. And I think in the internet, when we're talking about how easy it is to start a podcast, but it's not easy, this is where it comes in. It's very easy to record audio or to, do a video call and record it. It's hard to make something that's good and worth watching or listening to, but it's also really hard to make sure that people actually know about it. And if you look at any media company, and whether it's it could be HBO, like Curb Your Enthusiasm, it could be a movie studio, it could be any media company, you look at how you find out about shows or movies or podcasts or whatever it is, there is a marketing campaign behind it. And that has to start, almost at that strategy session piece around, like, if we're going to make this show, are we actually going to commit to marketing this thing to the right people? Because if we make a show and we don't tell anybody about it, there's no time and attention spent on it. No one finds out about it. So again, when we talk about identifying your audience at that strategy session piece, figuring out who they are and where they already go is a bit of a shortcut map to figuring out how to tell people about it. So if, there are lots of great tools in podcasting. There's one called Raphonic that's out there that you can go in and type in other shows and see, kind of this little map of people who listen to this show also listen to these other shows. And so if you know that there's another healthcare show that's kind of similar or, adjacent to the thing you'd like to make, type it into Raphonic and you get this little map of all the other shows. Those would be shows that you could be a guest on, or if you have a budget that you could pay to promote your show on, or to do feed swaps or trailer swaps on. You basically want to figure out, how do we put our show or our ideas about our show in front of the people who are primed to listen to it, and don't worry about all the other people out there. That's actually a lot of work. We had to develop a whole department in our company after a while, because we realized, even though we're working with these big brands, a lot of them were not used to marketing content. They were used to marketing products and services, and it's different. And it actually became like a really differentiated part of our company, was helping people think and act like a media company on the promotional side as well. It makes a huge, huge difference. And I would encourage everybody there to not shortchange that, and to continue to put stuff, to think about it well in advance, to plan all the different places that you want to be able to promote it and get it out there, and just keep doing it after the episodes have been done as well. Like, so, this is another interesting one on this front. The traditional piece is, we should put out an episode at least every week. We found that our clients couldn't keep up with it. When we put out something every week, it meant that marketing got compromised, because they couldn't activate all the channels that they had to be able to sufficiently promote a show properly. And we were leaving people on the table, like leaving potential listeners on the table, because you'd have to, now there's another new episode already. So we moved to every 2 weeks for most clients. That worked out really, really well. Didn't compromise listening at all. It actually improved it, because they were marketing more efficiently out there. And maybe one last thought is, if you work in an organization and you're making a podcast, you have a whole bunch of unfair advantages compared to most other podcasters. Most podcasters don't have the resources that you have. if you do an audit of all the different places that you can reach people, and maybe it's your website, maybe it's your customer database or your mailing list or your social channels, it could be your employees. If you create a list of all the different ways that you can reach people who are in your potential audience, you have way more than most other health podcasters who are independent out there, probably, and most other podcasters in general.
Yeah.
And making a plan to activate those and to act as one company pushing forth a gift that people are going to be excited to receive. If you treat it like a product launch, that's going to be a gift that is welcomed, you can have a very big outsized impact compared to most podcasters.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I see so many people think about the production costs, but they don't think at all about promotion and advertising, or they don't loop in the marketing teams to actually figure out how, oh, we're printing stuff. Oh, we should put a little corner in the back of the cover on the front of the brochure that says, hey, listen to our podcast. Printing magazines, printing things for events, putting email signatures, just including a little link like, hey, listen to the show we were a guest on, or
in physical
listen to our
locations.
new
You could have
podcast.
signage in clinics or things like that, like all sorts of different things.
100%.
Yeah.
So many different ways, but then also putting some money behind it as well. So there's lots of organic ways. There's newsletter lists and there's websites. I see so many people put they say, oh, well, our podcast is on our website, and it's underneath, resources, blogs, other media. It's like, but meanwhile, at the bottom, they send the links to LinkedIn and Twitter and TikTok. They'll send you right off the website to go, see grandma's pictures or your friend's vacation pictures, but they won't have the little Apple or Spotify icon at the bottom to say, hey, here's where you can go and listen to our show on the footer of every single page. So lots of little basic things like that.
Because that's like, you own that audience, right? Like that's an audience that's opted in and saying like, I would like to hear more from you. And there's no third-party algorithm determining whether they actually get to hear from you. Like when they sign up on a podcast, they get it, right? It's I don't know if everybody fully understands how valuable that is, that it's like, it is an audience that is opting into you, and you control that without any interference from a third party.
You've been really generous with your time, Steve. I've got just two more questions for you. I think first is, I know we mentioned that your wife is a doctor. You are obviously, you've been a patient at various points in your life. What kind of things can we take away in the healthcare sector? What would be some of the advice that you would suggest we start with or apply from your book or otherwise, so that we can begin to create useful, engaging content through audio?
Well, it's funny. The one thing we haven't talked about is stories. And I think there's a difference between conversation and stories. And the human brain is wired for story. Like when we hear a story start and somebody's got a problem or something happens in their life and they're trying to fix it, we want to hear how the story ends. And there's a whole bunch of science behind why we're wired for story. But medical stuff is very well suited to storytelling. And I don't know that there's enough storytelling. There's you certainly could look at television as an example of like some of the most popular shows on television over and over and over again are medical shows, because there's an unsolvable problem and there's a race to find a diagnosis and a solution at the end of it. I think that there's a lot of other podcasts out there that are not, I'm trying to think of the nice way to say this, are not as scientifically based, that are spreading a lot of information about health and wellness and what people should be doing, taking care of themselves, that are using a lot of smart techniques. And I think in some ways, I would encourage the medical industry or the health industry to think about like, how can we make shows that are on par with the things that we're potentially concerned about, so that we can actually have equal footing in this space. Because it's, I don't know if this is too controversial for me to say this on your thing. You can edit this out if you want, but
all right.
I just feel like, there's a lot of misinformation out there, and the stuff that is compelling wins. And I think that there are people who are not doctors and are not, putting a lot of ideas out there in popular culture that are not necessarily rooted in science and are not necessarily the healthiest things in the world for people to do, but they're using effective communication techniques. And for the health community to figure out how to use the same techniques and to use the power of story and compelling hooks and openings and all those sorts of things would be would be great.
Hey, this is not controversial at all. I'm glad you said it. It's one of the things we're talking about in several sessions here at the Health Podcast Summit. We just had a conversation with Aaron Carroll of Academy Health talking about the same sorts of issues. We've had several other speakers that are talking about the fact that we need to be emotive. We need to be engaging. We need to establish trust. And that's where podcasts really have a really strong capability of being able to use the time to establish that trust, to listen, to share, and explain things in a way that isn't just raising the volume of your message or just dumping more data on the recipient. It's really taking people through a story and helping them understand some of the different things and feel heard and validated, and then also engaged.
I hope this is an appropriate metaphor for the medical community, but I think storytelling might just be the sugar that makes the medicine go down.
I love that.
Yeah.
We're going to end it there. Tell me, Steve, how can people get in touch with you? Where can people engage with you and your content and everything you have going on?
Well, my website is my name. It's stevepratt.com. And I'm actually working on a very strange new project that has a lot of health involved in it. I'm doing a thing called the Midlife Field Guide, which is a year of public experiments to try and figure out midlife with my own life. And a bunch of it will be health related. I'm in the middle of 6 months of no drinking alcohol. I've started running. I'm doing all sorts of weird stuff and kind of reporting on it there. And there will be a podcast that is coming out as part of it as well.
Of course, there's going to be.
Beard is
I'm
part of
looking
it.
forward to
The beard is not health related, but I don't usually have a beard. I don't usually look like this. This is an experiment. So,
okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Steve, thank you very much. The book is Earn It. Steve is the author, and I appreciate your time, Steve. And good luck on the experimentation. We look forward to following your work.
Thanks for doing this. I love that you're doing this summit, and I really appreciate being part of it. It's a real treat. Thanks.